I would like to profusely thank the International Ukiyo-e Society for granting me the 2025 International Ukiyo-e Society Award. I feel very honored. In my talk today, I will focus first on my life as an ukiyo-e dealer and then on my kyosai collecting. I actually bought my first Japanese print when I was 11. My parents were university professors in America, and we spent a sabbatical year in London in 1969. We lived around the corner for one of the few Japanese print dealers in Europe at the time, and I spent my pocket money on prints. One of my first purchases was an impression of Hiroshike's Plum Garden at Kamata from the famous series Edo Meisho Hyake. It was completely faded, but only cost £2. At the age of 18, I was accepted to attend Harvard College. The ukiyo-e collection at Harvard's Art Museum is first-rate and includes the finest collection in the world of surimono. I spent 4 very happy years there, centered around the museum. I was given free run of the collections and had part-time employment with my curator professors who were in charge of the print and drawings departments. I closely studied at first hand both Western and Japanese prints and drawings. I think this combination has greatly helped my connoisseurship. I wrote an honors thesis on Utamaro under John Rosenfield, who was the doyen of Japanese art professors in America at the time. As I was spending my summer holidays in England, Rosenfield sensei arranged for me to study Utamaro at the print room in the British Museum. So even at the ages of 18 and 19, I felt at home there. In my 3rd year, I had the great good fortune to meet Roger Keyes, and he became my mentor. Roger is best known as one of the finest ukiyo-e scholars of his generation, but he was initially a print dealer. He bought a good number of the most spectacular prints from the first Faver sale on commission for David Rockefeller, who donated them to the Asia Society of America in New York. I mention all this because my academic training has greatly influenced my career as an art dealer. I was taught at Harvard to look and look and look, so that a cumulative sense of quality could be learned. But Roger also taught me to trust my intuition, and my instincts have, thank goodness, usually stood me in good stead. I was also encouraged to explore the somewhat neglected areas of ukiyo-e collecting, such as illustrated books, drawings, and hanging scrolls. Even today, with all the interest in ukiyo-e, for every individual collector of eihon, hanshitai, and kakejiku, there are many, many dozens who only collect prints. In my time at the Harvard Museum, I realized that the academics spent most of their time in the library, while the artists, collectors, and dealers were looking at the original art. So I decided to try and become an art dealer. After graduating, I moved to London to begin my career, and I borrowed a few $1,000s from my lovely parents and started dealing. I rented a room in a cheap boarding house and spent all my money on building my stock of prints. As I had limited funds, I often sold items quickly to other dealers, but also made frequent trips to small museums in America that had print rooms. They often had circles of collectors who loved prints, and I would sell items from my small stock, all the while developing new contacts. I felt very comfortable in that environment. So again, my academic and museum training helped considerably and gave me an advantage over my more experienced and wealthier colleagues. It took me a while to build up my business and my confidence before I started to deal in Japan. I felt somewhat insecure about it. I only made my first trip to Japan in 1988 after being a full-time dealer for 7 years. My first trips were during the bubble time, and I had fabulous experiences from the start. Japan was quite simply a revelation. My friends thought I was going to Japan to source material, but I was mostly selling. Many of the friends and colleagues I first met there are still my friends today, and I absolutely treasure these relationships. Every serious dealer has made discoveries, and I will now share 2 of the highlights of my career. The first occurred in 2007. There was an auction at Sotheby's in Paris that was selling Hokusai's Great Wave. Currently, in 2025, the interest in Hokusai and this print is higher than ever, but this was not quite the case in 2007. We all know that original versions of the Great Wave are rather common due to the huge numbers that were initially printed. There are many reference works now available that note the great variations between the early impressions and the latter ones. Of course, it is only the earliest examples that enable us to see the true intent of Hokusai as an artist. In Paris, I studied the print carefully. It was in very good condition, and I believed it to be a fine, early impression, one of the best I had ever seen on the market. Two of the most experienced Tokyo dealers had flown in specifically to buy the print, but somehow I held my nerve in the auction and managed to buy it at exactly my top bid. I felt like a hero for about 20 minutes, and then I realized that I had spent quite a lot of money. If I couldn't sell the print for a profit, I would be in serious financial trouble. Shortly after returning to London, I had lunch with Tim Clark, who was at that time was curator of the Japanese collections at the British Museum. Tim, who has been a friend for almost 45 years, is one of the great curators in our field. He's a wonderful scholar with a brilliant eye and has devoted his career to increasing the 19th century ukiyo-e holdings at the BM. I knew the museum had two other impressions of the Great Wave, so was only showing him the print to share my discovery and get his opinion. To my delight, he immediately asked whether I would consider selling it to the museum, as the other impressions that the BM owned were decidedly mediocre. In order to justify the price and persuade others to raise the necessary funding, Tim had to first convince himself that it was worthy. So together we took the print to Paris and New York to compare it with the celebrated versions in the Musée Guimet and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Fortunately, with the help of Roger Keyes, who had previously studied innumerable impressions of the print, it was determined that my print was amongst the top dozen or so impressions in the world. After acquiring the print, Tim wrote that it was the British Museum's finest and most important ukiyo-e print. As it's a matter of public record, I can tell you that I sold the Great Wave at that time for £140,000. It was a very canny acquisition, as it would now be worth 10 to 15 times that in today's market. Tim published a monograph on the print, which has been very useful. It also served as the foundation for the late Hokusai project, which brought together international scholars and led to numerous important publications. It then culminated in the magnificent exhibition Late Hokusai at the British Museum in 2017. My other great discovery, which occurred in 2018, again in Paris, was even more of a revelation. I was in town for business, and as I had a spare hour before catching my Eurostar train back to London, I dropped by to say hello to the leading French Asian art expert. She kindly told me that there were a few items that should interest me that might be coming up for sale. She showed me a dilapidated cardboard storage box containing mostly illustrated books. One of these was the first ever book by Hokusai, a Kibyoshi of 1772, which had come from the collections of Hayashi Tadamasa and Henri Vevert. I later sold it to the Sumida Hokusai Museum. Also in the box was a series of small preparatory drawings, which were unidentified. I looked at them in amazement as the quality was very high, and I immediately thought they could be by Hokusai. I only had time for a very quick look before my train, but I took a few photos with my phone. What I found particularly exciting was that the compositions and subject matter of many of the drawings seemed completely new to me, which also indicated the hand of the master. I had been studying Hokusai drawings ever since my university days, and with the tutelage of Roger Keyes, had come to the conclusion that most of the drawings one comes across are either copies or school drawings. I was able to buy some of the few genuine drawings that have come on the market during my career at various auctions held in Paris, including some of the preparatory drawings for Hokusai's famous book Fugaku Hyake, which had come from Hayashi and Vevert. While waiting to see whether the drawings would indeed be for sale, I showed them to Dr. Sadamaru Koto, the noted Kyosai expert and curator of my collection. She helped enormously in researching the drawings and came to the conclusion, like me, that the drawings had to be genuine. After several months of nervous waiting, I was told that the drawings would indeed be sold at auction. The auction house had taken independent advice and had concluded that the drawings should be attributed not to Hokusai, but to Katsushika Isai, a minor pupil of the artist. This, I hoped, would affect the other bidders who might not be as confident as I and could help my chances. In the end, I managed to buy them. The drawings were expensive, but not nearly as costly had they been catalogued as by the master himself. This time, I thought immediately to offer the drawings to the British Museum. This was just before the COVID pandemic, and Tim was on the verge of retirement. Tim was rather busy with various projects, so it took a few months before we could conveniently meet. When I showed him the drawings, we spread them all out on the large table in the center of the Japanese study room. You were there, Koto. Tim was totally flabbergasted. He took me aside and breathlessly asked me 3 quick questions. What is the price? I told him. Where did they come from? I told him. Do you have a French license for the legal sale of the drawings? When I said yes, he proclaimed, let's try and acquire them for the nation. As with the Great Wave, and with the help of Koto and other scholars, Tim did extensive research to determine the authenticity and significance of the drawings within Hokusai's oeuvre. Also, as with the Wave, Tim published the drawings in a wonderful monograph, and the drawings were exhibited to great fanfare at the British Museum. The drawings have been acclaimed as one of the most important Hokusai discoveries in recent years. And now I'd like to discuss my own Kyosai collection. Kyosai has been a wonderful artist to collect. A child prodigy, he was a draftsman of the highest order and was remarkably prolific, working in many styles and medium. I simply adore his works for their spontaneity, audaciousness, and wit. He is without doubt one of the most exciting artists I have ever encountered. Though he is now recognized as one of the most remarkable artists of his age, he was seriously underrated, especially in his native land, when I first sought out works by him some 40 years ago. His works show an enormous range in style, subject matter, and technique, and I have made every effort to form a representative collection. As the most famous artist of his day, his works are often faked, and I relish the chance to use the connoisseurship skills I learned at Harvard to help determine what is genuine and what is not. At present, the collection contains upwards of 1,000 objects, and the majority of them are on long-term loan to the British Museum. In addition, they are all available for public study. So any of you who are visiting London and want to see some of my collection, you're please most welcome to get in touch. When I started my career as an art dealer some 45 years ago, it was never my intention to form a personal collection. It was enough of a luxury to acquire and study works of art of many varied tastes before passing them on to collectors and museums. However, the idea of collecting Kyosai was thrust upon me by 2 different events which took place almost simultaneously in the early 1980s. The first was the highly fortunate purchase of an important Kyosai painting of a Daruma. I had spotted the painting in a minor sale in London, undescribed and given a lowly estimate in the catalogue. Although I had never before seen a genuine painting by Kyosai, I knew that works by him were often faked. In spite of this, I was struck by the quality of this painting, and hoping it to be genuine, attempted to do some research prior to the auction. In the library of the Victoria and Albert Museum, I was able to study a rare copy of Josiah Condor's 1911 Kyosai monograph, which was illustrated with the paintings he had acquired whilst a pupil of the artist. To my amazement, I found the actual painting reproduced in Condor. Assured of its provenance, I was able to acquire it for just £55. The power and the intensity of the Daruma filled my room in the cheap boarding house where I was then living. Even though I could have made a quick and handsome profit, I was determined to keep it for further study. It is now one of the foundations of my collection. The second event occurred only a few weeks later. I had bought a small album drawing in Sumi of an elephant playing with a tanuki. I sold it the very next day to a collector friend who'd loved animal paintings, but literally awoke at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking of the drawing and saddened by its loss. Excuse me. There's lots of pollen in London this week and everyone is suffering, so excuse me. Thank you. The agony of knowing that I had lost something so precious was tempered by the happy realization that I had finally discovered my own personal taste. You'll be pleased to know that after a few years of pleading, my friend finally relented and traded the drawing back. So I feel this close personal connection with Kyosai, and I hope you'll forgive my whimsy when I joke that it was Kyosai who discovered me and not the other way around. After I was collecting for a few years, I met Oikawa Shigeru and Yamaguchi Seiichi in London, who enthusiastically introduced me to the world of Kyosai studies in Japan. Shortly thereafter, I was very pleased to meet Dr. Kawanabe Kusumi, the great-granddaughter of the artist, who has devoted her life to furthering our knowledge and appreciation of Kyosai. I also started lending to the various Kyosai exhibitions that were taking place in Japan and Britain. The British Museum exhibition, Demon of Painting, The Art of Kawanabe Kyosai, was held in 1993, and it included a significant number of works from my own collection. I've also loaned a number of items to the important Kyosai exhibitions held at the Kyoto National Museum in 2008 and the Suntory Museum of Art in 2019. Because Kyosai was a prolific painter, print designer, and book illustrator, I was happily buying works by him almost every month. However, a significant event occurred in 2013 that hugely increased the quality of my collection. I was approached that year by Fukutomi Taro, the famous nightclub owner and collector. Fukutomi-san had started collecting around the time of the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, and he owned some of Kyosai's finest works, including the pair of Night Procession of 100 Demon screens, a fine version of Jigoku Dayu, a superb ghost painting, and a wonderful Eniki volume, amongst others. I had met Fukutomi-san briefly a few times, but had never dreamed he would be interested in selling me his collection. I had only known the works in his collection from around a dozen paintings that had been frequently exhibited in Japan. In fact, in his rather large, rather chaotic home and art storage facility, there were hundreds of other paintings, prints, and books. Acquiring the collection was a huge expenditure for me, though the price was very fair. I actually think Fukutomi-san truly wanted to pass over the baton to a fellow collector who loved Kyosai as he did. I could talk for hours about the whole transaction, but would like to share one anecdote to reveal how special I found Fukutomi-san to be. After purchasing the collection, I decided to have the paintings shipped to London, but as the prints were more manageable, it was agreed that I would collect them in person when I was next in Japan. I met Fukutomi-san at his art storage warehouse, and he was smiling broadly. "I found even more Kyosai prints," he said, while holding up a small pile of prints that I had never seen. "I'm really happy for you," I said, "but I'm seriously broke at the moment." He smiled even more broadly. "No problem at all. They're included in the collection. I want you to have them." Amazing generosity. And for the rest of his life, he would periodically get in touch to gift me another Kyosai work that he would occasionally discover amongst his hoardings. Now, I've been an art dealer for most of my life, but I never met anyone like him. Koto, do you remember when you told me of his death? We're having a regular conversation, and when you suddenly mentioned the sad news to me, I spontaneously burst into tears. Around 10 years ago, through a mutual friend, I was introduced to Sadamura Koto, now Dr. Sadamura Koto, who was then a student at the University of Tokyo. I was so impressed by her intelligence, and passion for Kyosai that I have made every effort to support her research on the artist. Since publishing her PhD dissertation on Kyosai from the University of Tokyo Press, and in addition to her role as a visiting researcher at the British Museum, she is also the full-time curator of my collection. Working with Koto is an absolute delight, and it has been a pleasure to share the new discoveries that her research has uncovered. 2 exhibitions solely displaying my collection were held in Japan, at the Oto Memorial Museum in 2002 and the Bukamura Museum of Art in 2017. More recently, in 2022, the exhibition Kyosai, the Israel Golden Collection, was shown at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. Amongst the works by Kyosai that are perhaps my favorites are his paintings of animals. Based on extensive study of the living world, his animal subjects manage to be incredibly endearing without any hint of sentimentality. My small album painting of an elephant is a prime example of that. I'm delighted that 2 books have been written showing Kyosai animals from my collection. The first was titled Japanese Menagerie, printed by the British Museum in 2007, and more recently in 2022, the book titled Kyosai's Animal Circus was published to coincide with the Royal Academy exhibition. The good news is that Koto and I are currently planning a new exhibition in Japan with a host of exciting works, including many animal paintings and prints that have never previously been exhibited or published. We hope to announce the venue later this year. When the artist Mordre Mempes met Kyosai in the 1880s, he described him as the greatest of all living artists. I must confess to my shame that when I first read those words in the early days of my collecting, I was somewhat skeptical of such high praise. But now, after nearly a lifetime with art, it is my firm belief that Kyosai can take his place with the immortals. As a dealer in the field of Japanese prints and paintings, I am often asked whether I miss the art that I sell. Because I am fortunate to have the luxury of my own collection, this emotional loss rarely occurs, and I relish the opportunity for study and reflection that collecting Kyosai has afforded. I'm particularly appreciative of the interaction with fellow collectors, scholars, and enthusiasts, and I feel so fortunate to have friends throughout the world who share my love for Kyosai and Japanese art. Thank you.